If there was one engine who was proud to work on the Fat Controller's railway, it was Oliver, the Great Western Engine. Ever since he was saved from scrap by Douglas, along with his brake van Toad, Oliver was more than delighted to have been given a new home and a second chance of working life. Oliver enjoyed working on Duck's branch line, but there were times when he didn't mind a good run to stretch his wheels as far as the big station or beyond. But there were times as well where Oliver would easily get annoyed with the tiniest things. "There's a new film that was in the cinema last week," he said. "Anyway," Percy continued, "it was all about a railway that was closing down, or so driver says, of course, and two drunk men stole an engine and drove it on the road." "Did you just say an engine drove on the road? In this film?" he asked. "Yes," replied Percy, "but it was a very funny story from what driver says." "Percy," said Oliver sharply, "nothing like that would ever happen on the Fat Controller's railway. It's a film for a reason. You wouldn't catch me doing a reenactment of that silly little picture." Percy felt rather hurt, but said no more. That afternoon, Oliver took some empty trucks to the ballast yards, where he found Duck. "Percy comes out with the silliest things these days," he complained. "What's rattled your coupling today, then?" chuckled Duck. Oliver told Duck about the movie. Duck guffawed with laughter. "I'm surprised at you, Oliver," he said. "It's only a movie. It's nothing to get upset over." "Yes, but something like that would never happen here," said Oliver firmly. "Honestly, fancy getting carried away by two drunk men and being driven on the road. It's ridiculous." Duck just chuckled as Oliver marshalled his trucks to one of the ballast chutes. That evening, Oliver's mood had not improved. Percy usually took charge of the mail train, but tonight he had been called elsewhere. The Fat Controller entrusted Oliver to take the mail instead. As Oliver puffed along, he was still in a foul mood. He was too busy thinking about Percy and the film that he didn't notice a red signal. Earlier that day, George the steamroller had been working at an abandoned station, turning one part of the railway's loop into a road. George, of course, had been careless and had tarmacked it his own way. But George knew it wasn't the right way. Oliver went through the signal, and little did he know what was going to happen next. The next thing Oliver knew, he suddenly hit a stone in the middle of the road. He toppled over and landed into a nearby ditch. His crew jumped to safety, luckily landing on the railway line nearby. "What the heck are you playing at?" George shouted when he caught his breath. "You steam engines shouldn't be on the roads." "Well, if you'd fix that wretched crossing," Oliver shot back. "That's enough," said Oliver's driver. "We're going to have to leave you here and go for help." They returned soon. "The breakdown services won't be here until morning," said Oliver's driver. George's driver politely offered Oliver's crew a ride home. Chortling at his own wit, George headed back to his yard, leaving a rather embarrassed Oliver in the ditch. The next morning, the breakdown crane arrived to re-rail Oliver, but he wasn't pleased which engine was bringing the cranes to him. Percy had the slyest grin on his face when he saw Oliver being lifted out of the ditch and back onto the rails. He took Oliver back to the yards at Tidmouth for his crew to check him over. They were just finished when Thomas arrived with his morning run. "Well, well, well, Oliver," he remarked. "That was quite the stunt you pulled last night, wasn't it?" "You know, Thomas," said Percy, Oliver here thinks that a scene from a silly movie would never happen on the Fat Controller's Railway. Quite right, chuckled Thomas. Hey Oliver, there's going to be a film in the cinema next week set in a galaxy far, far away. I don't suppose you'll be given a spaceship makeover for that, will you? Oliver didn't say a word. He now thought the subject of movies and reenactments was the last thing he wanted to think about.